We are just waiting for committee to start. Should be any second now. And there it is, right on time.
Welcome to this fantastic committee. We are now in sitting. And before introducing and allowing our distinguished guests to tell us more about a very important subject, I would invite our member Ramsey to close up and continue with our process on C12 that we were conducting last week. Thank you very much, Chair. And following the previous informal discussions that we've had since last Tuesday, I'd like to amend the position or the motion that was offered for C12. I would like it to read as follows. Notwithstanding the motion adopted, the motion which was adopted on the 28th of October, the committee would like to amend the last paragraph as follows. That the committee move to an article-by-article discussion of the report as soon as the last witness has been heard. And as soon as this, we will do it as quickly as possible. And now on the 18th, before coming back to C8. Madame de Bellefeuille, mic please. Okay, Madame de Bellefeuille. I invoke the rules. We are engaged on the agenda today for C8. Last Tuesday we had a motion, we adapted, we modified it, we carried it, and I think that was quite correct. And now, before we get our witnesses here, we are in public today, we should respect what today's agenda is. We took a half hour last Tuesday.
Yeah, deal with this after.
To try to wrap up a C12, and we agreed on that motion. And this morning it would not be reasonable to strike up that same decision and repeat it again. We are on C8, and C12 has nothing to do with the current study that we're looking at. Well, I think that the chair may render a decision on that, on the acceptability of this motion. So I would like the committee clarify what the confusion. We didn't take necessarily the time to have all that discussion last Tuesday. If you'll allow, Mr. Chair. We took a whole half hour to debate that. We came to an agreement, and now you're more or less reneging, and we should modify something that took 30 minutes to prepare. There were discussions, and the Conservatives were probably in agreement with your motion. And if you feel at ease not to respect the rules, I do. I know that you're kind of back against the wall, and you'd like to impose a new motion, and you can't expect me to accept that. There was negotiations between Liberals and Conservatives last Tuesday, and in a few minutes I say it contrary, it's not receivable, and I will vote against it. Well, you have every right, ma'am, to express your opinion on that. What we know equally is that all those decisions are the fruit of conversations that were in camera, and it takes into consideration all the totality of all the work of the committee, other reports as well. I know there were conversations. We might discuss C8 and the border issues. We'll be completing that shortly. And now, given the totality of all our reports, and to optimize the work of the committee, in order to assist with for the analysts and the clerk, they have to do their jobs well as well. I think we should clarify the position.
You
Well,
have the
I don't
witnesses in
find
front
this
of you.
motion
You've already
acceptable.
wasted 10 minutes.
I think we came to a good agreement last time, and it's a matter of trust. The Liberals feel comfortable in coming back on a question, and you yourselves as well, on an issue that had been resolved. We have no intention to obstruct anything here. No intention to, filibuster or obstruct in any fashion. And I'm sure it's the same thinking with the Conservatives, but it's a question of principle. If we let this slide, it creates a precedent. And we are the guardians of rules of order, and I would hope that you don't have partisan, informal discussions and try to... I do not participate in those discussions. As you know, I am the chair. I'm here to chair. I receive the directives from the totality, the common view of the committee, and I would urge you to do the best work possible. Compromise is required from time to time because we have C8 and C12 to look at. We want to make sure that we don't mix oranges and apples. Back to Mr. Caputo. Thank you very much, Member Bellefeuille. I understand your position clearly.
I'll lay out the Conservative position in what I hope is very clearly. Conservatives will agree to this motion on C12, but, and this is where we get into C8, as long as it is clear that the minister appears on C12 and C8 separately. I have assurance from my colleague, as I understand it, that the minister will appear for one meeting at C12 and one meeting at C8. If that's the case, we can agree to both.
Monsieur Caputo, maybe simply state what are your reasons for having, because we understood it would be 2 hours overall, so 1 hour for C12, 1 hour for C8. Just maybe let the committee know why you want it to be in two separate times.
This was an agreement with the House leaders, is my understanding. That's why.
Now,
So I'm just trying to give effect to the agreement.
So the usual procedure of committee business is to have ministers appear for 1 hour on a particular bill or on a particular study, which he will do. So when that will happen is yet to be determined, but he will be there for 1 hour for C8, and he has committed also to be there for 1 hour for C12. Mr. Ramsey?
And we agree with Mr. Caputo. If that's what the Conservative wants, we'll have the minister appearing on two separate occasions.
Conservatives want is also a normal procedure. Sometimes it may not be possible to abide by it, but that's what expectations would be in most cases. Alors, ceci étant dit,
you could have dealt with this after the witnesses.
I don't think they should proceed with the motion that has been proposed on C12. Do we have to vote? Do you feel the necessity of having a vote? Okay. Just raise your hand. Those who are in favor of this motion on C12? Those opposed to the motion on C12? Mr. Ramsey, would you like to go forward with C8, which is the discussion for today? Yes, but we also have a motion on C8 that was tabled with the clerk and Bloch.
Oh my God.
In relationship with the C8, the law on cybersecurity, modifying the Telecommunications Act and correlative act legislation, that we hold 4 meetings to greet witnesses, including the minister. That 2 of these meetings would be on an article clause-by-clause study of the bid. and offer drafting instructions to our analyst as to the motion adopted on the 18th of September and in conformity with C8. Thank you, Mr. Lanville. Consensus, unanimity perhaps on this particular motion? Will the Minister of Industry appear? Because in C8, I mean, she has a lot of authority on C8. Maybe we have to adjust slightly the wording. The motion that Mr. Ramsey read. Is it clear that we are going to add the presence of the Minister of Industry? Well, in the mission that I have in writing, which the interpreters don't have, it's indicated that the committee set aside 4 meetings to hear from witnesses, including the Minister of Industry, and then go to a clause-by-clause study. Well, I would like to omit that because I consider that in C8, the Minister of Industry, which is responsible for telecommunications as well, has a very vast amount of authority, and I do believe that we should hear from her for an hour, which I would insist that she be first to be called. Well, we cannot oblige a minister to appear, but, well, yes, but she's the master of the rules of her department.
Like, this is so rude to the witnesses.
Well, we can't
They
compel
took time
a
to come
minister
here.
appear.
It's been 20 minutes. You haven't asked them a single frickin' question.
So we should have to amend the motion to correct that. Well, I would hope that the chair would rule the committee with the rules that the committee has adopted to use, the rules of order. So I would propose that we invite the Minister of Industry and Communications. This be added to this motion, perhaps, and we could maybe finish with this motion. I think we have already clarified that the current invitation, there's no invitation to the Minister of Industry. So if you wish to add an amendment to add the Minister of Invitation as well as the Minister of the Public Security, we accept that amendment. Any comments, Mr. Rainville, Mr. Capito?
Try to summarize that in English. So the motion stays the same.
Les interprètes me disent à l'oreille qu'ils n'ont pas reçu le texte de la motion. Ça, c'est quand même une base. S'ils pouvaient avoir le
Well, the interpreters have noted that they have not received a written copy of the motion. So does the Liberal team have a copy or 3 for the interpreters? We're going to suspend just for a few moments.
Are you
Neither of the
kidding me?
motions have been presented.
You haven't even done opening statements from the witnesses yet. And Duclos was just talking about how last committee, we handled this last committee. Yeah, you handled it after the 2-hour period. Let the witnesses get questioned over your topic that you're studying. You're talking about you're talking about a separate bill now. Absolutely ridiculous. Let's tune into something else while we wait. Because, yeah, this is not what I tuned in for this morning. I didn't tune in to see Liberal filibustering for 20 minutes. I would have just slept in. Fucking hell, man. Let's tune into the House.
Administration of Justice.
Question from the Honourable Member for Nunavut.
I've mentioned already that we all know about the overrepresentation of Indigenous and racialized people in the correctional system, and this bill would broaden reverse onus on many of the categories that are of the Indigenous and marginalized people. And I wonder if the member can share what supports will be established to those that are still quite oppressed by current system right now.
Very brief answer from the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I thank the member opposite for her excellent question. Once again, we have made it very clear there will be resources that will be allocated with regards to ensuring that all provinces are going to be ready to do their work, and so there will be the notion of mental health criteria that will be looked at so that we can ensure that the jails are not overpopulated with people who do not benefit from the reverse onus.
Have to resume debate. L'honorable.
The honourable member for Mont Saint Bruno L'Acadie. Madam Speaker, I rise today to express my support for Bill C-14, an act to amend the criminal code, the youth...
Okay, I don't want to listen to liberals talk
to develop
liberals.
A concept of a First Nations climate lens. This concept has clear applicability to net zero conversation and more specifically to emission reduction plans in 3 ways. First, net zero must not be interpreted as the end goal, but rather must be conceptualized as the process leading to a just, equitable, and resilient future for our future generations, founded on the First Nations' right to self-determination. Second, it challenges the mitigation adaptation dichotomy rampart in climate discussions by focusing on complex and multi-dimensional nature of First Nations climate solutions. And 3, it shifts our focus towards interrelationships between the 3 C's, colonialism, capitalism, and carbon, centering on an approach rooted in relationships that value the nexus of people, land, and their mutual reciprocity. From this perspective is not just a global shift and movement away from the status quo, but revitalization of our value systems that connect to the land and nature laws that govern our interactions with all creation. Canada is at the crossroad. The magnitude of the climate crisis requires a transformational shift in the approach that Canada and the world take to address the climate crisis. Instead of a doubling down on the approach of climate competitiveness that invests in the same technological and market-based systems that create this problem to begin with, we must see great potential for this community to apply First Nations climate lens to the implementation of Canada's 2030 emissions reduction plan and all of Canada's climate policy going forward. Closing remarks. Our First Nations solutions can reframe the conversation and lead to transformative.
Thank you, Mr. Labaume. And we will now thank you to all the witnesses for their opening remarks. We will now start with the Conservative Party for 6 minutes. Mr. Ross.
Thank you. And my first question goes to Mr. Labaume. I read your document that you submitted to the Environment Committee, and thank you for that. It's very well written, very clear. But prior to White Contact, First Nations did not have hospitals, highways, schools, medicine, all types of things, phones, computers, even money for that matter. So I'm quite interested to hear what the Assembly of First Nation means by saying that we've got to return to the land. Can you expand on what that actually means?
Yeah, I'll start, and Miigwech for the question. That specific point comes from how we've worked to conceptualize the First Nations climate lens, and ultimately what the problem that elders and knowledge keepers have identified as the root causes driving the climate crisis that we're faced with. And in that regard, it's what they say is that we're experiencing an imbalanced relationship with the natural world. And what the center of that...
So I get the high-level discussion. What I want to know is the quality of life that's been afforded to all Canadians, not just Aboriginals, is based on energy as a fundamental component. So returning to the land is... I just want to know, are we talking about the houses we dwell in, for example, or maybe the energy source? So what specifically are we talking about by saying, let's return to the land?
Yeah, I think we're both talking in the practical of how do we ensure that our energy systems, our health systems, our housing systems are efficient.
Okay, back to the filibuster, which seems to be still suspended. It says they're not suspended, so now I'm confused. Let me see. Yeah, it says they're in progress. What is going on here, man? What is with Parliament this morning? There we go. About time. Oh, okay. They have their audio fucked up. Yeah, they have their audio fuzzed out. What are they doing, man? What in the God's name is going on? Yo, Chris, can you confirm it's still fuzzed out as well? I want to make sure it's not just me, but no, they still have it fuzzed. Have they muted it? Yeah, so usually they fuzz it out like that when they go in camera. I'm not actually sure when exactly it happens, but they're obviously not in camera. We can see this. Yep, it's still fuzzed. No way I'm watching QP if it's going to be like this all day. Yeah, QP is usually the most tech-supported thing because it's the most watched thing. Okay, now I'm seeing it as suspended again because they realize they're having audio issues. Yep. I almost feel like this is on purpose at this point. Fuzzed for me? Yep. Yeah, I don't know what the hell they're doing. Yeah, they're talking about it right now. You can see them saying there's an issue with the audio. Yep. "30 minutes in, I think they don't want one of the witnesses talking." Yeah, I'm starting to attribute it to that. Because there's 1, 2, 3, 4 different, well, there's 6 different witnesses, but from 4 different offices in the first hour. And they've already wasted half of that time. So if each office gets 5 minutes, that's 20 minutes. That means there's only 10 minutes left for questions. Like, it seems very deliberate.
Many of our members represent the critical infrastructure sectors impacted by this legislation, while others make up their supply chain, large and small businesses alike. Members join the CCTX because they want to actively share cyber threat information, to help build awareness and resilience in others, to get ahead of the threat, to prevent the breaches and the corresponding need to report that this bill governs. But they're limited in what they can share. As Canada advances its national cybersecurity posture, one policy concept merits greater attention: safe harbor legislation. While overlooked in the current proposed legislation, it plays a critical role in fostering transparency, cooperation, and resilience across our digital ecosystem. When we talk about cybersecurity, we often focus on technology, on firewalls, encryption, and artificial intelligence. But one of the most powerful tools we have to strengthen our defenses isn't technological at all. It's collaboration, the sharing of cyber threat information to enable others to better protect themselves.
That's technical information.
To prevent a breach from happening. But this requires protection by legislation. Safe harbor protection is about creating a climate of trust. We need to ensure that organizations who are trying to do the right thing by sharing useful information about cyber attackers and their techniques are not punished. Safe harbor protection helps others to not be the victim of a breach. Mandatory reporting is what is done after the fact. We are interested in prevention. Why? Because without safe harbor protections, too many organizations hesitate to talk about breaches or vulnerabilities that fall below the level, the threshold of reporting to regulators. They fear lawsuits, reputational damage, or regulatory penalties. As a result, critical information stays hidden. The same attacks can then impact others across sectors and across borders. Attackers will keep using the same techniques over and over again. We have seen it numerous times in the last year. Safe harbor changes that. It empowers companies to share threat intelligence with government and with each other, knowing they're protected when acting responsibly, without fear of legal consequence. It's not about excusing negligence or shielding bad actors. It's about enabling responsible behavior, creating the legal certainty needed for transparency and cooperation to flourish. Ultimately, safe harbor protection strengthens our collective resilience. It allows us to learn from each other, to collaborate across sectors, and to build the trust needed to defend Canadians and Canadian organizations. If we embed safe harbor legislation in our cybersecurity policies and legislative frameworks, we can build a culture where reporting, learning, and collaboration are seen not as risks, but as responsibilities. That is how we move from reactive cybersecurity to a truly resilient digital Canada. In cybersecurity, silence is the real threat. Safe harbor ensures that speaking up is safe and that doing the right thing protects us all. Thank you.
Madame la députée Nandurand.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je regarde le temps passer.
Thank you, Chair. I see the time is flying by, and we have a panel that is very interesting, and I think we're deprived them of quite a bit of time in our original
yeah, because of you guys.
Discussions here. Perhaps we could recalibrate the rounds of questioning so that we could give each witness adequate time to present and ask questions.
What is coming is to split the remaining 1 hour and a half in two pieces, 45 minutes for this panel and 45 minutes for the other panel. I suppose there would be no objection to that, which means that I would thank you, Madam Quaid, and we would then move to Mr. Stupak for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, honorable members of the committee. My name is Philip Stupak. I serve as the Senior Director for Advocacy at ISC2, the Professional Member Association for Cybersecurity Professionals. Prior to joining ISC2, I had the privilege of serving in the Biden-Harris administration as the Assistant National Cyber Director at the White House. ISC2 is the world's largest association dedicated to cybersecurity professionals, representing more than 265,000 members and associates globally. Our second largest membership base is right here in Canada, with over 1,400 members. We offer 9 professional certifications, the most recognized of which is the Certified Information Systems Security Professional, or CISP, which is widely regarded by employers as the gold standard for cybersecurity expertise. I appear today on behalf of our global membership to express the cybersecurity profession's strong support for Bill C-8, an act respecting cybersecurity. We live in a period of extraordinary uncertainty. For much of our shared history, Canada and the United States benefited from geography as a natural deterrent. The vastness of the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans provided a measure of protection our adversaries could not easily overcome. That era is over. The 2010 Stuxnet cyber attack against Iranian centrifuges demonstrated for the first time that the boundary between the digital and physical worlds can be breached with tangible, real-world consequences. Today, 15 nations possess blue water navies capable of projecting power across oceans. 8 possess nuclear weapons. 170 nations have cyber capabilities. We've already seen the effect of cyber attacks here in Canada. Patients in hospitals across southwestern Ontario were forced to reschedule surgeries and appointments, costing millions of dollars and delaying care. While 516,000 patients had their private health information compromised, we know that cyber attacks can cause an even greater damage at a broader scale. It may take a Navy a week to cross the Pacific, or minutes for a missile to reach its target. But a cyber attack could return hospital systems the age of torchlight and hacksaws, and communication to horseback dispatches, without warning and without attribution. This is not speculation. This is preparation. Our adversaries are actively working to undermine critical infrastructure. Even a minor activation of pre-positioned digital weapons or malware across essential sectors could result in service disruptions, communication collapse, power outages, water shortages, and transportation paralysis at a time and place of an adversary's choosing. In the worst case, it could return modern societies to conditions resembling the pre-industrial era. But I want to be clear, our adversaries are not invincible. With foresight, coordination, and policy action, we can and must defend ourselves. Bill C-8 is an essential step towards ensuring those defenses are in place before they are needed. The amendments to the Telecommunications Act are particularly significant. By prohibiting high-risk suppliers, removing compromised equipment, and requiring pre-approval for certain technologies, the bill strengthens the sector that underpins every other sector. Vulnerabilities in telecommunications are vulnerabilities everywhere. The creation of the Critical Cyber Systems Protection Act is likewise prudent. It establishes minimum cybersecurity baselines across Canada's most essential sectors. I would respectfully encourage the committee to consider adding federally regulated water systems to that list, given their foundational importance to national health and safety. I likewise encourage the federal government to work with provincial, territorial, and municipal partners to ensure that critical infrastructure under their jurisdictions achieves the same level of cyber protections envisioned by Bill C-8. A qualified workforce is essential to executing the functions of this Act. Every day, ISC2 is training and certifying the government and critical infrastructure professionals who will be needed to implement Bill C-8. We cannot afford to assume that threats to the Canadian way of life are distant or hypothetical. They are real, they are present, and they demand decisive action. The responsibility for defending against these threats rests in part with this committee. Bill C-8 represents a thoughtful, measured, and necessary step towards that defense. Thank you.
Monsieur Stupak, la parole maintenant à Monsieur Noël.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, ainsi que les membres pour... Thank you, Chair, and for the members. I'm accompanied today with Mr. Dubois, who is our Executive Director and General Counsel.
Afin de replacer mes observations en contact.
Intelligence Commissioner is all about. J'approuve ou non certaines activités de sécurité. I obviously approve certain activities of national security and intelligence as seen by the CST and Service Canada ceases. Necessary because the activities the ministers authorize may be contrary to the law or breach the reasonable expectation of privacy of Canadians. Only my approval with my approval can the activities proceed. Le rôle du commissaire a été créé en 2010. The role of commissioner was created in 2019, particularly pertinent to this bill, and the mandate confided to the commissioner at that time includes the possibility that the CST can react efficiently to cyber incidents touching systems that are federal or designed to important to the Canadian government. More precisely, one of my functions is to examine the departmental authorizations that allow CST to conduct activities.
Security activities conducted by CSC lead to the collection of vast amount of information, including information in which Canadians have a reasonable expectation of privacy. To be effective in conducting cybersecurity, CSC needs to collect this information. I only approve the ministerial authorization when I'm satisfied that the minister has struck a reasonable balance between the security of Canada and the privacy of Canadians. This includes ensuring that appropriate measures are in place to protect the privacy interests of Canadians. Dans le cadre de mes fonctions de commissaire, je vois
I see a great value in a national approach to national security. Canada must have its necessary tools to protect its electronic essential systems. However, the tools must be accompanied by guarantees appropriate and independent surveillance.
This bill, where independent oversight would improve the protection of these privacy interests. I will raise one that relates closely to my role as IC. This bill aims to protect our critical cyber system. CSC is our national expert in cybersecurity and will, through this bill, receive information on cyber incidents. In my experience as IC, over 3 years and 45 decisions rendered to analyze and understand a cyber incident, it must have access to information about the incident. There may be situations where this information, as you were told when you met other witnesses, is only technical in nature, and sharing it with CSC raises no privacy concern. However, to fully understand the cyber incident, other situations may require CSC to have access to information, including technical information, in which Canadians have a reasonable expectation of privacy. I've seen it. Technology and cyber threats evolve faster than legislation. The bill should provide the flexibility to adapt accordingly and allow for the sharing of this information with appropriate oversight. Dans le système actuel, avant de recueillir...
In the current system, before obtaining this information or intel, they have to obtain the ministerial approbation and the commissioner. We hope that this process would be in place by 2019, but not in 25.
Consists of adopting a regulation setting out what information about cyber incident is to be shared with CSC and how it is to be shared. As you know, there's no independent oversight of a regulation. One possible, simple, and effective oversight measure would be to require annually a ministerial authorization establishing a framework for how CSC uses and shares the information, which would then be subject to review and approval by the Intelligence Commissioner. Une cybersécurité efficace.
An efficient cybersecurity is essential for Canadians. The CSE must have the information that it needs in order to bring its excellent work even better to protect our necessary security and oversight.
That targeted additional safeguards that do not impose a heavy administrative burden on our agencies would increase Canadians' confidence that the measures intended to protect them do not themselves unnecessarily intrude on their privacy.
Quelques secondes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci.
Merci. Désolé de vous interrompre. Aussi.
Sorry for having interrupted you. I didn't realize you were that close to concluding. So welcome, and now if we will begin with Madame Dufresne. Mr. Dufresne. Well, thank you. I'm glad to see that we have people here who are very concerned about the repercussions of C8 and other consequential acts. So these questions are addressed to their representatives. There is no doubt that we are looking at a very serious consequence where cyber incidences are breaches.
Nova Scotia Power in May of this year are particularly concerning as they can compromise systems and services that are essential to the health, safety, security, and economic prosperity of Canadians. Such incidents may result in unauthorized access to or disclosure of personal information, potentially leading to major privacy implications and a real risk of significant harm to affected individuals. For these reasons, I support the objective of Bill C-8 to protect systems and services that are vital to national security or public safety from cybersecurity threats and vulnerabilities. Like its predecessor, Bill C-26, Bill C-8 recognizes that steps must be taken to protect critical infrastructure against cyber threats, which are continuing to evolve in sophistication and complexity. This is necessary from a security standpoint and from a privacy standpoint. Bien que des mesures de protection renforcées.
While stronger cybersecurity protections can help to reduce the likelihood and impact of privacy breaches and its consequences, it's also essential to ensure that the new powers or authorities and obligations that are created to improve cybersecurity contain the necessary limits and that do not have an unintended impact on privacy. I'm pleased to see that Bill C-8 incorporates a number of improvements compared to its predecessor C-26, including additional guardrails or proposed order-making powers and new notifications and reporting obligations.
Between the bill's cybersecurity objectives and privacy rights and interests. However, some privacy risks remain, including lower thresholds for the exercise of certain powers and authorities with potential privacy implications, the absence of a mechanism to ensure that my office is notified of major cybersecurity breaches that impact the privacy of Canadians, and insufficient minimum privacy requirements for the sharing of information with foreign governments. To address these risks and achieve the necessary balance between security and privacy, I would recommend, first, that the legislation impose a uniform standard requiring that any collection, use, or disclosure of personal information be both necessary in the circumstances to achieve the stated purpose and proportional to the benefits to be gained. Second, that information sharing agreements entered into under the legislation provide for minimum privacy safeguards in order to strengthen governance and accountability and ensure a consistent standard of privacy protection when information is exchanged outside of Canada. And third, that the relevant government institutions, including the Canadian Security Establishment, CSC, be required to notify my office when they're made aware of cybersecurity incidents involving a material privacy breach so that we can together collaborate and coordinate our efforts in protecting Canadians' privacy. Bien que cela ne vise pas uniquement le projet de loi.
While this is not specific to Bill C-8, I would also reiterate my overreaching recommendation that government institutions be legally required to conduct privacy impact assessments and to consult with my office when developing any new programs or initiatives with privacy implications for Canadians. Thank you for the opportunity to present my point of view on this bill, and now I'd be pleased to answer your questions. Thank you very much, Mr. Dufresne, as well. We're going to start with our members. Member Caputo, please.
To all of our witnesses, where to start? I'd like to start with Monsieur Noel and Monsieur Dufresne. You both spoke a lot about what's not in this bill. And sorry, I'm going to take a step back before I forget. We only have you for really a few minutes today, unfortunately. What I would ask, if you are comfortable with this, is whatever we don't get to, especially here, you've given us comprehensive areas where the legislation is silent. Because really here we're talking about two things. The problematic aspects of the legislation, as in what's written and what's wrong with what's written, and then what's not present. What would be exceptionally helpful to me, and perhaps this already exists, is if you were to enumerate those things, because otherwise we're going through transcripts. I'm not sure if your office has the capability. I think that would be very helpful if you were able to say, this, in our view, the legislation needs to include this, this, and this. That would help us tremendously at the clause-by-clause and amendment phase. So I'll leave that with you. So I'm going to focus on what's in the bill. And if I will give you both 2 minutes, please point out specific provisions if you're able, because thus far you've spoken in generalities. If there's a specific section where you can point to and say, in my view, section is a problem because. Am I clear? Yes. Mr. Dufresne, do you want to have the first couple of minutes, please, and then we'll move on to Monsieur Noel?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Caputo. And so I've highlighted the three theme of recommendations, necessity and proportionality being one, information sharing agreements, what's the content, minimum content there, and then the sharing authority. So with necessity and proportionality, I'll start with the positive. There has been amendments to the minister's order-making power on the Transportation Act section. So if we look at section 15.2, we have mentioned that the provisions or orders must in scope and substance be reasonable in relation to the gravity of the threat, including that of interference, manipulation, disruption, or degradation. So that doesn't use the word necessity and proportionality, but it achieves that purpose, because you are talking about what are you trying to achieve, and is it proportional to that? By contrast, if we look at the powers given to the Minister of Industry under 15.4, we have the ability to require any person to provide to the Minister or any person designated subject to any condition may specify any information that the Minister believes on reasonable ground is relevant. So that's not a necessity and proportionality test. That's a relevance test. So it's different. Later on in the bill, we have exchanges of information with foreign governments based on necessity. In the cybersecurity section of the legislation, we have the ability to issue some directions for cybersecurity. And there you have either necessity alone or an absence of necessity and proportionality. So my overarching point is, looking at those sections, there is a precedent for a good necessity and proportionality clause. It's the clause that I've cited. And what's interesting is, even in the cybersecurity bill, if we look at the section 147.1, there is an annual report that has to be prepared. And in there, the legislation says at subclause F that the report has to include an explanation of the necessity, proportionality, reasonableness, and utility of the direction. So I think that's an example of why this proportionality is necessary. There's already a recognition that it should be in the report, but it should also be in the power. In terms of the information sharing agreements, then we should just specify the types of restrictions for sharing with other countries.
Thank you very much. Any other, if you have anything else, please let us know in writing. The more specific and concrete, the better. Mr. Noel, thank you.
Yes, I'll be precise. I'm dealing, my knowledge is with CSE. I know the information that is being transferred to CSE in order for CSE to be able to do its cyber activities. The framework, where's the framework? Look at section 17 in part 2 of the bill. It doesn't stipulate anything. And they're saying in there that there'll be regulations eventually. At the present time, under my legislation and the CSE, when an event of a cyber activity incident occurs, the minister gets involved and then renders a decision. You go into action, and then I get the decision. I approve it, amend it, change it, and then the result come out. The other point I want to tell you is, I heard by the bureaucrats earlier this week that they told you, oh, it's technical information. I agree that it's technical information, but I also know that if you want a positive result on an incident of such importance, they need to go into content. They need to. And I've seen it, and I see it in every cyber operation. that have been involved. You're asking me, is there other things? I'm not talking about it. I'm limiting myself to this. But it's clear that the warrantless search and seizure create a problem.
Merci, Monsieur
and I'll let
Noël.
others deal with that.
Thank you.
I have also a problem with the personal information.
If we don't, please do write to the committee on those points. I would really appreciate that. Thank you.
That's a good comment, MP Caputo. Let me turn now to MP Ramsey.
Mr. Stupak, Mrs. Quaid, I'd like to know, Bill C-8 is the Canadian version of similar bill elsewhere. I'd like to know, in terms of benchmarking, what is in C-8 that is not elsewhere, and what is elsewhere, what is not in C-8? So if you could elaborate on this, especially in view of our main partners.
When I think about benchmarking, one of the first things that C8 does that I think is quite wise is consolidate some powers in the minister. This is important. Right now, many countries have a distributed system of defining cybersecurity policy and reacting to a cybersecurity incident. By having this invested in the minister, you have one person who is ultimately responsible. When we created the National Cyber Director role within the United States, it was at the behest of our Senate, and Senator Angus King from Maine famously said, I'm doing this because I need one throat to choke. And I think that that is one of the elements that is important in C8, is that you are creating this uniformity within one minister. While obviously there's other ministers and other ministries that will participate in implementing those actions, having that one person to look over all of it is important. I think what is a little bit different, perhaps at least from the United States system, which is what I can talk about, is the ability to direct industry to do certain actions. I wish I had that ability. That was something that was certainly lacking during my tenure within the White House, is that I could not direct industry to take specific action. So I think that is beneficial, especially when you're dealing with a cyber incident where time matters. So that's something that is not within our system that you do have here, and I think is beneficial.
And so I agree absolutely with what Mr. Stupak has said. What is not in this, as I said, is the safe harbor legislation, which is in the U.S., certainly the U.S. version of this. And that has been critical because it has enabled organizations to share information, not breach information. That goes to the regulator, that goes to the authorities guided by this legislation, where it belongs. It's the information about activity that falls below the level of a breach, but it's still an attack. Information like that can help other organizations to defend against exactly the same attack. Think about Scattered Spider for a minute. We've all heard about them in the news. They have been so successful because we're not sharing the information on how they get in and what they do when they're in a system. If we could do that, we would help strengthen all the defenses.
I would like to, for Mrs. Stupak mainly, maybe to comment on the assertion from L'Honorable Simon Noël, which says that normally when there's a technical cyber threat, you need to go into content. What is your appreciation of that comment?
I do not believe that I would necessarily agree with that statement. I do think that you can often deal with cyber attacks when you're dealing with how are you stopping it, usually at the more technical level. There are adequate protections that we have put in place so that you do not have that privacy element that you're looking into. Of course, I say this very respectfully, I do think that occasionally content can or needs to be looked at. However, that is not something that I would suggest is always the case. We are frequently sharing TTPs for an attack, which does not go into content.
My experience, on a very short answer, on at least 12 cyber incidents in Canada, there was at the end intrusion into content, to the point that these intrusion into content were reported to the appropriate bodies. I'll limit myself to that. My own experience as a Canadian, being in a very special position, is I'm not saying that it's all the technical information. I'm saying it is on an exceptional basis, content is shown.
Monsieur Noël, puisque nous sommes sur ce sujet, est-ce que c'est...
While we're on the subject, these cyber incidents or attacks, were they coming from outside your country or yes? Thank you, Member Ramsey. Madame Labelle, 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Chair. Mr. Dufresne, my question to you, you spoke of Articles 15, and there's a whole detail as to the reporting and reviewing and the powers of the minister to correlate various authorities. I'd like to deal with 34, Article 34 orders. A lot of authority is given in Clause 34 to get a written order and explain exactly what they want. And I believe that we haven't discussed that very much, but I'm quite concerned with this particular clause. In other areas, there's transfer of information, but in 34, we say that it says that an extreme situation perhaps, but the superintendent or the commissioner would ask a supplier to allow more information without really do it privately. So that, did I properly interpret this? That much power is reverts to the minister, and there's no way to understand as a citizen. My conversation may have been heard by the authorities. Microphone. Microphone, please. Okay, sorry. Well, that article aims at the superintendent's authority, and there'll be questions that will deal with Ministry of Industry and the Bank of Canada. We're looking at verifying registers and books, for example. That kind of authority is often found in various laws. It's not a matter of, it's not one of my major preoccupations in any case. The third recommendation is that these organizations must share and notify my office when they have cyber incidents which may involve impacts on the privacy of Canadians. Now, if not, but otherwise we must be advised. Previous discussion, does it deal with private information or not? The law recognizes that it may, because we're talking about private information. We include that in confidential information, and it's quite comparable to legislation in Europe, which allows establishments to control that. Well, an example. Is Microsoft considered an essential or critical service to Canada? I'm using Microsoft as just as an example, but let's say the superintendent of financial institutions would ask Microsoft for information. Would they be subject to comply? Well, in Section 1, communications is covered, and we name a list of what types of information. Now, with their activity, would they fall into that category? Well, one has to see what they're doing with the information. But if they come under this particular chapter, he may issue directives to confirm and provide the information. we have to reinforce criteria where there's a certain proportionality as to private information and protect them better, and that it be notified to my office. We have to have an independent overview of its applications. We can also share with international partners, Five Eyes, for example. It's an improvement, but we could go even further. In C12, there's a standard that we have perhaps exempted from international conventions or agreements. Now, we could add that, and it would reinforce public trust in the system. My question is going to be similar to that by Mr. Caputo. It's going to be somewhat overlapping with C12, which we'll be looking at later. Do we really have a good basis to protect privacy issues in Canada? My concern is that democracy is based on the protection of privacy rights. I know that it's not necessarily, the American model doesn't particularly inspire me, but I think we have an opportunity here to improve C26, to modernize it, bring it up to date, and to demonstrate to Canadians and Quebecois that we are protecting the private information. The various agencies, of course, comply with those rules, but there's been a lot of dodging of some of these rules sometimes. So I appreciate the fact that you want to have very concrete results, how to integrate these as amendments. Perhaps you can assist us with that. Sure. Internationally, UK, Great Britain is a member of the Five Eyes, and they also say that there's a necessity, significance, and pertinence to protecting privacy. Thank you. Great exchange. Now, Member Lloyd, 5 minutes.
And will you be providing recommended amendments to committee to address the concerns that you've laid out today?
It's been requested in the exchanges, and so we'll follow up with
Thank you.
Specific.
You were a parliamentary law clerk in council for a number of years, is that correct?
Yes.
And you also served on the Human Rights Commission as legal counsel?
I did.
For many years, so it's fair to say you have a lot of experience in this. We've had a chance to ask the department about the powers that have been provided to the minister in Section 15, specifically about the authority to compel the telecoms to remove services for a specified person. They gave assurances that the scope of the legislation doesn't pertain to free speech or content that otherwise poses no threat to the integrity of the telecommunications system. Do you believe that the scope and the reasonableness requirement that has been outlined in this legislation is clear enough to restrict the potential abuses of these legislative powers?
In terms of the section that you're referring to, in terms of the order-making power under the Transportation Act, that's 15.2 bracket 3, there has been an addition on scope and substance to require that it must be in scope and substance reasonable in relation to the gravity of the threat, including that of interference, manipulation, disruption, or degradation. So I think this doesn't use the words necessity and proportionality, but there is that sense of balance. So I would find that achieves my goal of making sure that you have security and privacy. It's a balancing. We don't want to have a zero-sum game where you go too far in limiting the agency's power to protect Canadians, or that you go too far in harming Canadians' privacy. So that clause I'm comfortable with. It's the other clauses in terms of some of the other powers where we're only talking about necessity or we're only talking about relevance that I would want to see those strengthened to bring in this key concept of proportionality.
Can you elaborate further on those that you just spoke about? Well, you want to see further strengthening?
When we look at necessity and proportionality at my office, it's a little bit of the same test under the Charter of Rights and Freedom. So it balances the fundamental rights with the important public interest imperative. So you need to look at what is your goal? What is your objective? Is it important enough? What is your measure? Is your measure effective?
Can you be specific about these measures in the bill that you're talking about?
Well, in the context of we have the power to ask an organization not to use a certain provider. So there may be a national security concern with a specific company, a link with a specific country. So looking at that, then you're going to look at what are the measures that you're putting in place. Are you overreaching? Are you doing something that just goes too far relevant to the threat? You can have a major threat. You're going to be able to have a higher measure. If the threat is smaller, more contained, well, you need to make sure that you're not doing collateral damage.
And you don't think that proportionality has been included?
I think it has been incorporated in the section on the order-making power. I don't think it's been incorporated elsewhere in terms of information requirements or on the cyber side.
Thank you. I'm going to move on to the Intelligence Commissioner. You raised some really interesting concerns about warrantless search and seizure, and you talked about content. And I know the department was at pains to assure us that they're not really concerned about the content that's going through the pipes. It's about whether or not an action is a threat to the pipes themselves. Can you elaborate about your concerns about warrantless search and seizure and your concerns about content and, give us some more clarity on that? Thank you.
On the warrantless search and seizure, it really triggers the Charter. And Section 8. It's evident for any judge, it stands out. And more so when there are penalties. Penalties provided for in the Act. That triggers more, and that's the Supreme Court saying that. If you look at what you've got now in this bill, you don't have anything.
Can you provide an example where that Section 8 right could be triggered by this legislation? Can you provide a specific example?
Well, any search and seizure, if they go into an office and open up without a warrant and start searching, it's evident that there's an intrusion being done. There are two ways to go into an office. You go in, would you mind giving me the following document?
And you don't believe those protections are
we're
included?
going in because we want to go and get that document. Okay. And usually police force needs...
don't they have other legislative tools to do that anyways in Canada?
Well, under the criminal code, there's certainly some provisions on that. But if you look at the criminal code, a warrant will be required.
Merci, Monsieur Noël. Merci, Député Lloyd.
Thank you to the both of you, Ms. McCann.
Yeah, so it just increases the power.
Merci,
the legislation already exists.
Je partage mon temps avec Madame Dandouant, si on reste à la fin. Thank you for coming today. My question will be for Mr. Stupak. Thank you for your testimony and for speaking on the importance of this bill. And I echo your standpoint on the implications of a cyber attack on our infrastructure from a monetary and security perspective. So under Bill C-8, designated operators will be required to adopt comprehensive cyber programs and reporting incidents essential for baseline protections. So you have expressed a strong support for Bill C-8, and given your experience and extensive knowledge on similar laws in Europe or Five Eyes, particularly in the U.S. When it comes to federal policy and workplace deployment, you have experienced what worked and what didn't work. So I would like to focus on implementation capacity and professional standards with two questions. The first one, how prepared is Canada's current cybersecurity workforce to meet the compliance and technical demands that Bill C-8 introduces? And from your international perspective, how does Bill C-8 align with similar frameworks in allied jurisdictions, and where should Canada prioritize harmonization to reduce compliance challenges for global firms?
For both those questions, they're extremely pertinent. On the workforce question, Canada has a very robust workforce. You have an impressive workforce that has the tools and capabilities to implement C-8. I will be honest, we all need more. We need more professionals within this space. We need more people who have certifications that indicate that they have the necessary skills in order to do the work that needs to be done. This is important. Too often we are focused on education. Does someone have a necessary degree? But what we're really looking for are the skills in order to do this work. There are efforts underway, both under the NICE framework, for example, to define what those functions are that every role within cybersecurity should have, and then how do you meet those functions. This is being developed. I think this is something that is not robust enough across borders, but the point is that you do have the capability to begin implementing. You are going to need to do more education. You're going to need to do more training. You're going to need to do more certification. On the question of international frameworks, because you do take the sectoral approach and is directed at a particular sector, I think you are very well aligned with the United States and how we have historically done this by looking at each sector and what needs to be done within that sector. Not all sectors are equal. Bluntly, the water sector within my country is not at the same level as financial services. And so you do need to have that approach because not everyone's ready to do the same thing at the same time. I would compare also to the NIS 2 standards from within the European Union. That is not how I would recommend this. There, they take much more of an auditing perspective, and it's impossible to audit all critical infrastructure as frequently as you need to. And moreover, the compliance regime is simply not mature enough or robust enough yet in order to comply with NIS 2. So I appreciate this bill takes more of a sectoral approach, more like the United States and a little less like the European Union.
Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. On a eu des commentaires très...
Thank you very much. We're getting very interesting comments and information from our witnesses. Mr. Supak and Quaid, what kind of information is shared, if you will? And how does that differ from typical data?
The information... Yes, the information that is shared under this proposed legislation would be information that comes from a successful cyber attack, a breach, if you will, where PII has been impacted or where other information has been leaked, taken, stolen, or otherwise made inoperable. That's critically important for our government to be aware of. And it is critically important that that be reported, because unless we are reporting on cyber attacks, we actually don't know the size and scale of the problem. What I was referring to goes beyond that. I'm interested in the information that is perhaps not quite so successful an attack. It is the information where an organization is impacted by a cyber attack, but it is not at the level of a breach. Their defenses held, if you will. Maybe the outer defenses failed and the inner defenses held. That's the information that is important to share with the greater community. Safe harbor legislation should never be restricted to sharing information with the same regulators and government officials that this bill represents. Safe harbor legislation needs to protect people and organizations when they share information with the broader community. And I'll give you a very quick example. We have...
In just a few seconds.
One second. We have one very large member who frequently tells me that they are able to share cyber information, TTPs, IOCs, with the FSISAC in the U.S. It's an Information Sharing Association for the Financial Services, that they cannot share in Canada because they're not protected. It's frustrating.
Well, I would have liked to hear Mr. Stupak on that, but
sorry to interrupt,
Mr. Chair.
We have 2 minutes and a half for Madame de Bellefeuille, and that will be, unfortunately, the end.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Président.
Thank you, Chair. Addressed to Mr. Noel, there's a lot of pressure currently from the RCMP, for example, from CSIS to have a more easy access to intel. Finding a balance between security and protecting also protection of personal information. So there's a lot of pressure, and it's tending towards that we don't want to lose the public's confidence and trust in our institutions. They are almost insisting on less transparency, because if we give too much transparency, we're exposing ourselves to more security risks, and it won't be very good for the country as a whole. Do you find it normal that here at the committee we can obtain more oversight on national security and information, because we are the people that are sort of giving the oversight? So if we give more authority to a minister or to a superintendent, and they do not have any responsibility to comply, it will become non-transparent. So what can we do about this pressure to open wide and control transparency? Well, I'm very, very empathetic to what you're saying. Well, we're in a world where cyber attacks are a new weapon of war. And when we look at the bad actors, whether it's a state bad guy or whether it's a personal gain like ransom, they have the tools to breach and get what they want, get the information they want. If you wish to really protect for all the people in Canada, your electors in your riding, you have to allow the government to have centralized tools so that they can fight with these bad actors. The challenge you have as legislators is, where is the oversight? To what degree the oversight? Which measures must be taken under consideration? And mine would be the private right of and on one hand, and security, national security on the other hand. Okay, I overstepped my time limit. Thank you. Well, this will close. This is very much appreciated. We are very grateful for the time that you have given us today, but particularly for all the preparation you have made to prepare yourselves for this meeting. So we commend you, and unfortunately we have to carry on with the second panel of witnesses. So thank you very much, and have a...
Okay, the second panel is actually a little bit better because they're having a lot more scrutiny on that section where the minister is allowed to shut off internet. So let me just... We'll tune into the House while we wait, but I'll just say here the actual witnesses in the second half are the Canadian Constitution Foundation, Privacy and Access Council of Canada. So they're going to be more advocating on the side of what's wrong with the legislation. And in the first hour, it was kind of like they liked the legislation. And we'll tune into the House while we wait. And of course, Kevin's here. Why wouldn't Kevin be here?
Here is going to occur. We have other legislation before the House, Mr. Speaker. Very important legislation. We can talk about Bill C-3, which deals with citizenship, where there is a superior court order that demands that the legislation has to pass by November the 20th. We have Bill C-4 that's just passed out of committee, Mr. Speaker. Bill C-4 is what legitimizes the tax break to millions of Canadians, over 20 million Canadians, Mr. Speaker. We have Bill C-14 before us, in which I understand the official opposition is very demanding and wanting to see bail reform legislation. But we all know that it does not take much to frustrate the legislation. We have a budget that's coming up on November the 4th, which will also demand time of the Parliament, of the Chamber here, Mr. Speaker. There are substantial things that are before us, And that's the reason why I look to my friends across the way, because they will ultimately determine if, in fact, we're going to be able to have bail reform before the end of the year. It's going to be up to the Conservatives to make that determination, Mr. Speaker. Let me encourage, in the strongest way that I can, that if you want bail reform legislation and the opportunities to be able to have extensive discussions at the committee level, you need to see the bail reform legislation pass quickly to committee. It does not take away from democracy from within the chamber. In fact, I can cite members from today already when I raised the issue about the end. Let's have a goal. Let's pass this stuff before the end of the year. Let's have new bail laws in place before the end of the year. And the Conservatives, I've had a number of them today that have said yes, that is something that we can achieve, Mr. Speaker. Well, I'm going to call their bluff and challenge them to allow it to go to committee. It means, Mr. Speaker, that they can continue to discuss it if they want to once it comes back in third reading, but it also provides the detailed discussions and debate that will occur.
This is the second day.
You know, the member says it's the second day. All she has to do is check with some of her members on the private members bill. I sat when I heard the member from, and I don't necessarily know the riding, Caribou and so on, where he talked about passing his private members bill and how substantial it was for legislative changes, in which it is, and he wanted to get it passed unanimously that particular day. He's trying to speed it up, and it's a limit of 2 hours for debate before it goes to committee. You can't have it both ways. So I would suggest, I would be happy if it was just limited to 2 hours in which the private members bill was. But the point is that we're not saying you can't debate the bill. The bill, in fact, can be debated in committee. It can be debated endlessly in third reading. But if you're genuine and you want the bail reform to pass before the end of the year, you need to allow the legislation to pass. You cannot continue to do filibusters on legislation. We had Bill C-2, which was debated for over 18 hours. The opposition are not a bunch of dummies. They understand the optics of filibuster. They understand that if you want to deliver for Canadians on bail reform, you need to allow the legislation to go to committee, Mr. Speaker. Instead of trying to politicize the issue, allow the bill, the legislation, deliver for Canadians. Put the interests of Canadians ahead of your political party, Mr. Speaker, is what I would say to my Conservative friends across the way. Let me suggest to you, the federal government is stepping up to the plate, Mr. Speaker, in a very real and tangible way. The stakeholders have been very clear on that. We've worked with the provinces. We've worked with other stakeholders. We're working with the average Canadians. The legislation that we have before us is a true reflection, and that's the reason why it's receiving the type of support that it's receiving. It needs to go to committee. But it's not just the federal government that needs to step up, Mr. Speaker. I don't know how much time, I think you said a minute. Yeah, that's going to be tight. Let me do a very, very quick quote, Mr. Speaker, from the Winnipeg Free Press, which came out back in September. And I quote, it's referring to the government in Manitoba. The NDP has spoken frequently about the commitment to safer communities. It has announced more funding for police and has supported federal efforts to tighten bail laws. But those measures mean little if there are not enough prosecutors to move cases through the courts in a timely fashion. It goes on, Mr. Speaker. The cost of inaction is far greater than the cost of investment. Failure to fund the Crown's office means risking collapsing trials. The point is, Mr. Speaker, it is the federal government, it is the provincial government, and ultimately law enforcement officers that do the job that they do, Mr. Speaker, through municipalities.
Okay, thank God the committee's back, because I can't listen to him anymore. Holy smokes.
Canadians' rights and freedoms through education, communications, and litigation. The CCF is most famous for successfully challenging the invocation of the Emergencies Act in February 2022,
where the federal court found that the invocation was ultra vires the statute and violated the rights to freedom of expression, as well as security against unreasonable searches and seizures. The CCF has serious concerns about one particular aspect of Bill C-8, which is Section 15.2, which would allow unconstitutional limits on freedom of expression, peaceful assembly, as well as association. Section 15.2 1 would give the Minister of Industry a dangerous new power to order telecommunications service providers to cut individuals off of the internet or phone services based on any threat to the telecommunications system, which includes all of Canada's internet, phone, and radio infrastructure. This need not be a systemic or even a serious threat. Sections 15.25 and 15.28 would allow the details of the minister's orders to remain secret under the threat of huge fines. While there may be circumstances where the minister requires the power to order malicious servers to be cut out of the system, it's dangerous to civil liberties to allow the minister the power to cut off individual Canadians without proper due process and to keep that secret. Consider, for example, a protester whom the minister believes may engage in a distributed denial of service or DDoS attack, which is a common form of civil disobedience employed by political activists. Using Section 15.2, the minister could order that this dissident's internet and phone services be cut off and require that that decision remain secret. That individual's only recourse would be to hire a lawyer at great expense to contest the minister's order, and that order would remain in place unless and until a court hears the case and orders restoration of the services. The person affected may not even be aware that they are entitled to judicial review because the statute does not require that they be informed of their right to challenge that order in court. To be clear, DDoS attacks are genuine cybersecurity risks, and they are a criminal offense. However, somebody merely suspected of planning to participate in such civil disobedience could be silenced. Without the internet or phone, they would be effectively cut off from all online expression. That would include, they would be prevented from constitutionally protected political activities, including speaking out in opposition to policy or meeting with others online, violating expression, assembly, as well as freedom of association. And while this statute appears to be a good faith attempt to prevent and stem cyber attacks, it does not include proper safeguards to prevent abuse.
Exactly.
Statutes passed in good faith are often used to violate rights, particularly in periods of political and social unrest. For example, the federal government ordered financial institutions to freeze hundreds of accounts without due process during the invocation of the Emergencies Act. This left some protesters and their domestic partners unable to pay bills in the middle of a very cold winter and violated their rights under Section 8 of the Charter. The government also used the act to block protesters from simply standing on Parliament Hill with the Canadian flag or a placard opposing vaccine mandates, violating their rights to expression. In other words, we can't just trust governments with this sort of power. There must be better safeguards built into the bill, and the CCF has 5 proposed amendments that would reduce that civil liberties risk. First, the CCF proposes that Section 15.21 be modified to clarify that the power to cut off services may only be used in cases of serious systemic risks. Second, the CCF proposes that the statute make explicit that judicial review is available and that services may be restored immediately by a judge. Third, the CCF proposes that the statute limit the secrecy of any order by requiring that it be published in the Canada Gazette within 90 days unless the minister obtains an order from the federal court prohibiting the disclosure of some or all contents. Fourth, the CCF proposes that such orders may only be kept secret where a federal court judge is satisfied that there are reasonable grounds to believe that the disclosure of some or all of the order would be injurious to international relations, national defense, national security, or endanger the safety of any person. And finally, the CCF proposes that where the judge is of the opinion that it is necessary to protect the fairness of proceedings for an individual impacted by such a decision, they may appoint an amicus curiae to assist that individual. Thank you for your time, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Merci, Monsieur de Haas. Monsieur Schultz, pour... Ms. Schultz, for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair, members of the committee. I'm going to do two things today. I'm going to go to specific clauses of the legislation that I think warrant a further look and potentially amendment. And then I'm going to talk about a practical policy tool to encourage compliance. I'm going to propose a cybersecurity investment tax credit for Canadian businesses. I think we have a once-in-a-generation nation-building moment here, and I think a tax credit's the way to go. My colleagues that preceded me did a good job, but I want to go through a couple of things. Section 15.1 sub 3 and 15.2 sub 5. These are the non-disclosure provisions, allowing the governor and council or the minister to impose secrecy around orders without any guiding criteria. And that's the point that I want to come back to. Secrecy must be the exception, not the default. And I think you should impose statutory criteria that need to be considered when determining whether or not to render an order secret. I would propose, if it were up to me, the degree to which disclosure could reasonably be expected to compromise the effectiveness of the order or jeopardize national security. Number two, the availability of less restrictive means, including partial or delayed publication to achieve the same objective. Number three, the impact of non-disclosure on the transparency and accountability of government decision-making. Number four, the necessity of non-disclosure in the light of the threat's urgency, nature, and duration. And number five, any representations made by the affected telecommunications service providers or regulators surrounding the need for confidentiality. I'm okay with secrecy, and I understand the need for it here. I'm just saying you need some criteria under which to make those determinations. The bill has criteria elsewhere for decision-making, just not around the non-disclosure. Next up, I want to talk about 15.1 sub 8 and 15.2 sub 10. And I apologize for being so detailed. I'm a lawyer. It's an occupational hazard. Here, the Crown bears no financial responsibility for arising out of orders, and I think that's sound. But we end up with a bit of a problem, because if you pair the no compensation rules with the no disclosure rules, that leads us to a situation where publicly traded companies could find themselves in breach of securities law. So if you have a material change to your financial books. So suppose a telecommunications provider they get a rip and replace order and it's $25 million. They can't disclose that to their shareholders if the order's secret. And so in that very moment, they will find themselves in breach of A, their fiduciary duty, and B, their securities regulations. So it's something we should consider. There's ways you can deal with that. I would propose allowing for regulations to allow for cost recovery in discrete and exceptional circumstances. You should also create a secure disclosure channel for affected companies to make these disclosures to their security regulators and auditors under conditions that will satisfy the safeguards surrounding the classified information. And somebody was talking about a safe harbor earlier. I'm going to talk about a different safe harbor here, because if it proceeds the way it's written, it could function as we need a limited form of legal protection for those officers and directors of corporations that comply with C8 on a good faith basis, but then it exposes them to liability under their securities law. So we need to make sure that there's a safe way for them to do that without finding themselves on the horns of a very pronounced legal dilemma where they cannot simultaneously comply with both obligations. Section 15.21 and Section 15.81, there's just duplicative reporting. There's actually two sections that require the minister to report to Parliament 3 months after the annual report. I think it's just a drafting error. You could easily clean that up, but it's really the same thing. More pronounced, Section 14.5 compels information. So this lets the minister compel information from any person. This isn't important for compliance, but you're also going to run into a Section 7 and a Section 11C challenge under the Charter if the material is used for the purposes of prosecution down the road. Add an explicit immunity use clause modeled after the Competition Act. This would make sure that the information is only used for regulatory purposes, not criminal prosecution. That'll preserve your confidentiality without weakening enforcement, but that is present in the Competition Act. Section 15.9, judicial review. I think there's an issue here, too, where the judge is not allowed, has to give back any irrelevant information that the minister provided. The problem is when a judge is reviewing something as on a JR, they're looking whether all the information that the minister relied on was relevant. And so you could find yourself in this awkward spot where a judge is not allowed to look at all the material that they need to for the purposes of determining relevancy. And so that's something you want to look at. It's a little bit like putting a hockey player on the ice with one skate and no stick. You just got to make sure that the judge has all the information that they need. And I think a simple amendment could solve that. Sections 142 under the CCSPA and Section 73 sub 3.3 on the Telecoms Act. I don't know if this was on purpose, but there is, under the Telecommunications Act, a company's only liable if the employee who committed the offense was acting within the scope of their job or authority. But under the CCSPA, that qualifier is actually missing. So you actually have, so this means two companies could face different standards of liability. So I think that's worth a second look to. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Scholl. Maintenant, la parole à Monsieur Lefebvre, qui est à distance pour 5 minutes, s'il vous plaît, Monsieur Lefebvre.
Mr. Lefebvre, who's out in cyberspace. Thank you. I stand before you today as president and co-founder of Crypto Quebec, a non-profit organization and social enterprise which promotes best practices on information security, intelligence, and geopolitics. Thanks for the welcome to this meeting on the review of Bill C-8. And Quebec is, of course, a contributed digital or infrastructure linked to protection of fundamental rights. I'd like to import that Canada has a very robust situation of legislation, Bill 25, as well as responsible institutions such as our Commission for Access to Information, actively monitoring compliance and citizens' rights. We also have many practices, standards, and certifications in place to inform Asian security to govern the activities of critical infrastructure in Quebec. It's a spirit of dual requirements, privacy and security, that I'm making my comments today on Bill 8. I'll add that while opponents of democracy have public intention to sow doubt among the population, our response must be increased transparency. The bill gives the federal government the power to order telecom providers and operators of critical systems to do or refrain from doing anything, potentially under the state secrecy. This mechanism raises two challenges. First, lack of clear safeguards regarding necessity, proportionality, duration, and recourse for orders. In Quebec, the protection of personal information is based on clear principles: privacy impact assessments, documentation of measures, transparency regarding interventions affecting an individual's life. This model must not be weakened by the adoption of a less stringent federal regime. I would recommend that any order issued under Bill C-8 be subject to a summary to public summary, annual reports, cable before the committee in the Assembly, and criteria of proportionality and explicitly enshrined in the law. Canada has demonstrated competency in matters of privacy and digital rights. Bill 25, health and example, strict obligations on public organization. Bill C-8 could create a parallel or overlapping regime for Quebec entities and international industrial entities operate in vital sectors, energy, telecommunications, etc., posing a risk of fragmentation, dilution of responsibilities, and confusion for citizens, which would support our opponents in their effort. It's essential that the federal framework explicitly recognize the organizations operating in Quebec are subject to Bill 25, and the Quebec standards remain at least as protective as the federal, not currently guaranteed. Unlike the rest of Canada, we have advanced governance and security of information systems through our ministry dedicated to cybersecurity. They work at a high level of security across all entities in governance. The independent entity responsible for protecting information, the Commission d'Accès, unlike the rest of Canada, has decided punitive powers in the event of violations. Bill C-8 would encroach on activities of these two, and in fact, in contrary, would represent a step backward for Quebec. This would weaken the confidence, communication, security, and resilience. In Quebec, we advocate a model where security is not achieved at the expense of privacy, but through strengthened control, encryption, governance, and auditing. I recommend that Bill A prohibits on weakening encryption, a clear distinction between cybersecurity measures and surveillance measures, and that any collection or sharing of sensitive data with notification to Quebec authorities when it involves Quebec establishments. In conclusion, I'd like to extend this invitation. Let's protect our critical infrastructure. Let's do so in a respecting citizens' rights, Quebec jurisdiction, and ensure that the framework adopt clear, transparent, consistent, proportional Bill C-8 should represent an opportunity and a challenge in Quebec. We already have a solid track record, and we'll build more confidence and trust with Canada. Ms. Polsky, you have 5 minutes.
Address the committee today. I am Sharon Polsky. I'm the president of the Privacy and Access Council of Canada, an independent, non-profit, non-partisan organization that is not funded by government or industry. Since launching 30-some years ago, the Internet has infiltrated our lives. I've spent those years consulting to governments and to small, medium, and Fortune 100 businesses, seeing how they apply the law and policy and identifying practical risks, invariably caused by human nature and increasingly the Internet itself. MP Caputo asked for some specifics, and I hope to oblige. The preamble says the bill is to protect telco providers and critical systems and provides the minister with great power to order them to do anything or refrain from doing anything to protect the Canadian telco system. Laudable. But it lacks adequate safeguards to prevent abuse or ideological attack. This new law to add the promotion of the security of the Canadian telecommunications system as a policy objective tells companies to plug the holes that were built into the systems, something that they should have done long ago to comply with privacy and other laws. Rephrasing the request isn't going to change much, even with AMPs. More on that in a minute. Under Section 7 of Part 2, a class of operators can be declared, and any person or organization declared a member of that class. The bill applies to enterprises within the legislative authority of Parliament, and Section 9.1 ensnares the rest. The businesses and the people whose products or services are in support of federally regulated enterprises. On accountability, the Auditor General noted the gaps in cybersecurity defenses undermine the ability to protect critical information and manage cybersecurity risks. Those gaps will remain even if this bill becomes law. The standards, laws, and frameworks already in place, the privacy, security, and risk assessments now done or supposed to be done, cannot prevent outages like we saw last week that took down half of the Internet, and again yesterday that took down another half of the Internet, each time grinding services around the globe to a halt thanks to a single technical problem. That's all it took, because accountability requirements are inadequate. And what accountability can there be when even the existence of orders can be ordered to be kept secret, and when the Governor and Council can direct that orders not be published? Doing that leaves everybody in the dark and speaks to an undemocratic lack of transparency and a shield against accountability. Section 15.2.1 requires the minister to reveal how many times in the previous year secret orders were made and other details, but statistics are cold comfort, especially given the broad information collection and sharing powers in the bill. Part 2 of Bill C-8 allows any service or system to be designated a vital service or system and requires designated operators, mitigates supply chain and third-party risks. It doesn't, but it should specify what risks are to be mitigated. Section 20 sub 6 of the CCSP prohibits a designated operator or class of operators from intercepting communications, but third parties that support critical services aren't included. That could easily be operationalized as encryption-busting backdoors. This and other governments have worked mightily over the years to circumvent encryption. C-8 needs clear language to ensure its broad powers cannot be used in any way by anyone to undermine or circumvent encryption, a ban even more urgent considering that Bill C-2's vague language would grant sweeping ministerial powers to order changes in Canada's telecommunication networks. The bill says AMPs are only intended to promote compliance and not intended to be punitive. They will benefit the largest providers, which can recoup the cost from their broad customer base and further solidify their dominant position and still evade accountability. Meantime, others will be bankrupted. Implementation must be monitored, measured, and mandatory, with Sarbanes-Oxley-like penalties imposed, including personal, not corporate liability, to make accountability inescapable. So they do the right thing from the beginning. But how will a Canadian regulator be able to monitor compliance, I wonder, when Rogers just announced it will be running its wireless network from India? Orders may be made about any threat, including that of interference and manipulation. We know elections have been swayed by social media content. AR for News often misrepresents the story. Will that be deemed manipulative or a threat and platforms subject to being silenced? And I wonder, by what objective standard, what calculation does one measure the gravity of manipulation? The bill must be clear. Finally, ordering that someone be denied internet access because the minister considers something they've done or said to be a threat or manipulative will mean cutting them off from phone service, which is now internet-based. Everyone in your house will be blocked from talking to friends, calling adaptive transport, phoning 911, applying to university. This is unjust and disproportionate, and what C8 allows. Bill C8 must be changed, or we will relive what my grandparents fled 100 years ago after the Russian Revolution.
And then
People placed in
I'm sorry
isolation
to
for their
interrupt,
views
but
conflated as the stuff
Madam
of good
Polsky,
government.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but that's all the time there is for this initial segment, which allows us to turn to MP Lloyd for 6 minutes.
Thank you, and thank to all the witnesses who are here today. And I really appreciate when people come forward with amendment ideas. Makes our job easier. I know the analysts were typing away, and they're very pleased with all the ideas that were put forward. I guess I'll start with Mr. DeHaas. I just wanted to something that you said. Do you believe that a denial of service attack is like a free speech right?
So I want to be very clear, Mr. Chair. I do not believe that a DDoS attack is protected free speech. What I'm saying is that someone who might be suspected of participating in that type of attack could face very, very serious consequences through 15.2 without proper due process in place.
I appreciate that clarification. Thank you. I'm just wondering, we had the privacy commissioner in here, and he had previously been concerned about C26. But he indicated that he felt that the necessity and proportion had been largely addressed by the introduction of a reasonableness requirement. We were told by officials from the government that the reasonableness requirement has been clearly outlined in a Supreme Court case. Why do you think that the reasonableness requirement is not suitable or not stringent enough to protect from overreach by the minister?
So the problem is, the reasonableness requirement is important, and it's a good addition to the bill. The problem is that the section 15.2 states that any threat could result in this this type of order. Any threat is simply not a high enough threshold. So the judge would be looking at this, and they would be saying, is this a reasonable decision based on a power that grants the minister the ability to do this type of thing based on any threat, no matter how minimal, whether serious or trifling.
But wouldn't reasonableness dictate that the response would have to be proportionate to the level of the threat? Or is that not clear?
So reasonableness would not necessarily, it would be reasonable in regards to what is written in the provision 15.2. So a judge later on looking at that would say, was this a proportional decision based on this power, which is very, very broad. This section 15.13, which talks about scope and substance, that's still scope and substance in relation to the provision itself. So I think that adding, the word serious and systemic to 15.
No, and I took that. I'm very interested in that amendment, so I thank you for that. It seems to me that we're talking about the secret orders, and the department came and assured us that, like in 99, they said 99% of cases that there's going to be no justification for a secret order, but in the 1% of cases where the disclosure of an order would in itself lead to a threat to the telecommunications system. But you don't seem to be convinced that that's a good enough safeguard. You provided the example of a protester who is suspected of wanting to commit a denial of service attack. What justification, what reasonableness requirement would be met by the minister to put a secret order on banning that person off the internet?
I think that would be hard to justify. I think there are occasions where a secret order would be warranted. You know, if we're talking about national security threats from other countries, foreign actors that want to take over parts of the system. But the way that it's written would not, it would allow the minister to do this and then keep it secret for long enough until the crisis that leads to this has passed. So think, for example, of somebody who is a protester who wants to take over the Prime Minister's website through a DDoS attack, and maybe a group is planning to do this as some sort of protest. As a punishment, without due process, the minister could do this and keep that secret, and we might never find out that had occurred.
Although there is a notification requirement now, but you're saying the notification requirement is probably not stringent enough?
I'm saying that it needs to be higher. Yes.
Now, I'm just going to move on to the. There's been talk about encryption breaking powers in the bill, and Mr. Scholl, I wondered if you had any. I didn't see anything in the bill about encryption powers, but it seems to be that people are saying that because they're giving the power of the minister to compel the telecoms to do anything or refrain from doing anything, that it could indirectly lead to encryption breaking. Did you have any comments on that?
Yeah, it's not specifically enumerated in the bill to be able to crack encryption, but you're right. There's broad language, anything. So I suppose you could maybe find yourself there, and that's why I was saying, like, let's be crisp on the criteria, right? There's bad guys doing bad things. We have to be able to stop them. We all agree on that, but under what circumstances? And let's just be crisp on the criteria that are set out. So when we get to determining whether or not this was reasonable or not, we know what yardstick we're using.
Okay, and I remember my question for Mr. Daha. When somebody, like let's say somebody is banned from the internet because the government believes they're going to do an attack, I believe they have to be consulted and told by the government that they've been banned, or is that not clear?
Well, I think that in most cases the government would, and they would find out, but it's not actually clear to me in the bill, and I think that's something that could be clarified.
And is it itself a crime to seek judicial redress for, like, if you feel that it's been unjustified, it violates your charter rights, and you go to a judge, is that a violation of the secret order? Is that a criminal in itself?
No, it would not be. There's judicial review would always be available. The problem here is just that to a layperson, they might not realize, they might be cowed by the fact that it's not entirely clear that they cannot go and seek judicial review, that would be breaching the order. So even though judicial review is essentially always available, it should be clarified.
Thank you.
Merci beaucoup à vous deux, Madame Dandurand.
Thank you both. Madame Dandurand. Thank you, Chair. I'm comparing the testimony we this day as to the testimony we heard last week from experts. Mr. DeHaas, one of the things that we've heard from your organization is that the bill might allow the government to disconnect Canadians from the internet if they criticize the government. An expert last week has told us that these personal opinions of Canadians does not apply. It doesn't come within the scope of the bill. And the idea of proportionality and necessity of an attack, that the law be applied. Well, how would you respond to that?
I think that the government may, in good faith, not be particularly interested in that type of censorship. But the problem is that the Act does say that it applies to any threat to the telecommunications system, so that it's very open to interpretation. Would a court find that the Act would allow this? Probably not. But the risk is that the government would do it anyway. For example, in an emergency, when tensions are heightened, this is the type of thing that can happen, and that's why it's important to make clear that these are serious threats and that they're to the system themselves. So systemic threats, not to individual speech.
OK, je vais poser un peu le même genre de question.
Okay, a similar question for Ms. Polsky. You were saying that this would allow to them to go fishing for information, for example, and that there's nothing that you mentioned as a threat should apply, and that it goes way beyond the scope of the legislation, or that they don't go just fishing for information. How would you answer that?
I think it's important, certainly, to protect our national critical infrastructure and to have provisions, but there has to be appropriate limits, because the language in the law right now is vague enough, as my colleague over to my left said. It's open to interpretation without specific boundaries, without specific wrappers. What constitutes a threat? Anything can be justified. It's very easy. It's human nature we're dealing with, and if somebody feels threatened, it's easy enough to say the things that need to be said, find the evidence, make an allegation, do what you want, and then leave the person to defend themselves after the fact. That's dangerous. So there needs to be clearer language so that it's not just an open-ended opportunity.
OK, donc il y a une section quand même dans la législation.
Well, there is a section in the legislation that what is to be considered as a threat, and it refers to other legislation, of course. Certain experts have addressed this question, and I'd like to perhaps move on to Mr. Schul as to comparisons with other international jurisdictions. We already said that the U.S. and Europe have different approaches, to try to balance both privacy and public security. Do you think that C8 is based on best practices internationally compared?
Through you, Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. I think it's a good bill. Don't get me wrong. I'm just asking for some provisions to be changed because I think they could be tightened up here and there. But I absolutely think we need it. And maybe I'll take a step back and say, when we're talking about privacy, we're talking about personally identifiable information. This bill is about the system itself, not just individuals. And that's the core evil that we're trying to deal with here, is that we're hooking everything we possibly can up to the internet, water systems, electrical systems. But we don't really talk about OT, like operational technology. But I will tell you right now that is what the bad guys are doing. They're pre-positioning on our critical infrastructure with a view to disabling us if we are ever in a conflict or to exert pressure. This is very, very bad. We got to deal with it. And so the point I'm making is I'm very supportive of this, just with some marginal tweaks to make it a little bit better.
Merci. Puis si je reviens à la
Thank you. And if we come back to comparison internationally, are there any lessons that can be gathered from this? If we follow up with some of your suggestions here?
You look at the closest comparisons will always go to the U.S., Australia, the U.K. The point is we don't have a mechanism for requiring critical infrastructure providers to report right now, and we've got no legislative authority to require telecommunications providers to rip out bad gear. And so our allies do. And so we're already behind the rest of the class. So I think just getting this bill passed is a step in the right direction.
Pour 15 secondes en tout.
15 seconds. I'll see them. Thank you. First of all, thank you all for your testimony. I think that there's a certain consensus here that it is a good bill, but there are improvements to be made, particularly to Section 15 or Article 15, Clause 15. We should perhaps take a look at that because, responsibility issues are not quite in keeping with the general authority of a minister. That's what I gather from today's testimony. So my question is for Mr. Lefebvre. In order to for us to know better, you talked about encryption. I think it's pretty important because you understand that it's completely absent from the bill. Can you explain why? Do you believe that this should be required to establish standards for encryption? Well, they don't talk about encryption, but there is a tendency today in Western democracies, the forces of order or the people in the intel sector are looking to or are starting to use as a common practice the encryption of everything. Anything that might be a hindrance to communications. There's a huge tendency, whether it's in the UK or the United States, to reduce encryption. Will Canada be a leader with the implementation of Bill C-8? If we want to lead, we have to specify that those powers, which are fairly broad, not be used to reduce encryption and be a hindrance to private information. Well, this obligation where the government doesn't have access to personal communications, if we lower the standards, they might turn out to be mandatory. So encryption is sort of a milestone, if you will, so that we don't have any obstacles to confidential communication. We've also, in your presentation, you said there was quite an overlap in Quebec and the federal Bill C-8. Well, we're well aware of that, but in the regulatory field, we will try to minimize that as much as possible. I represent the Bloc, and I know that when Canada wants to do this in cooperation with the present provinces, it's seen as an imposition that they are encroaching on, and there's several millions or billions of dollars that are available in the public treasury, and Quebec, the money's not being used to allow municipalities, for example, to go forward with their digital infrastructure. Is your main concern on this doubling of effects or redundancy? What's your main concern on that point? Well, there's quite a difference between C-25 and Bill 25 in Quebec and C-8. There's nothing to prevent any abuse of access to private information, but in Bill 25, it's a major point. Our protection of information, we're based more on the protection of privacy. Privacy first. That's in the Quebec bill. But in C-8, it's a technical approach. It's based on an essential infrastructure motive. All these minor details that individuals could be targeted are not really identified in Bill C-8. As to the overlaps, C-8 impinges or on some of the elements of Bill 25. The critical infrastructure, the way the authority is vested in various ministries and departments. It remains to be seen if certain powers or authorities in C-8, we get the impression that C-8 would have prescience over the provincial measures. There's not any real overlap for imposing certain demands of the private industry, telecom and companies. There might be an advantage of C-8 because there is no overlap, but if you want to map what's going on as to control per se, I'm sorry I have to interrupt you, but the time is, we are really short on time. So I want to thank the witnesses for their presentations and the time that you've invested in preparing for this meeting today with the committee. I'm afraid that's all the time we have. We're going to adjourn and we'll meet again.
Yeah, that's because you guys spent the first half hour having a circle jerk around about a motion that was already debated on last committee. That was ridiculous. I'm glad you guys stuck around for that, because, I mean, at some points there, like in the first hour, I was like, why are we even watching this? Like, that was ridiculous. Yeah. I liked the second hour. I was appreciative of the second witnesses. And I understand where the first witnesses are coming from, because their job is to advocate on behalf of cybersecurity, and those were cybersecurity experts, so they're going to like a lot of the legislation. And I'm sure a lot of the legislation is good, but as we were just talking about in chat, is when you put those poison pills in there, they can indeed abuse sections that are in probably just a perfectly good bill. Like, everybody's all for increasing security in our government systems. That's not something that somebody would go, oh no, we need less security and make it easier for attackers. No, there's probably some good stuff in the legislation, but it's when they put sections like that the minister can just deem anybody a threat and shut off your internet. It's like, that goes too far. So thanks for the coverage. Yeah, I appreciate you guys tuning in and watching. A little bit of a more boring committee. It wasn't as juicy as a lot of the committees are, but for me, I find this committee interesting on its study of the bill, because there is that issue, like I say, of that bill, of that section, that if it doesn't get amended and it passes, then there's that issue of government overreach, and we know what's happened before in history with the Liberals. So we have a little bit of a break till question period. We got question period in 50 minutes. Afterwards, we're going to watch Anita Anand for an hour in the Foreign Affairs Committee, and then we're going to switch over to OGO. So we've got committee afterwards, right after question period, 3:30. So we'll switch over to that. I'm just going to make the link now for question period. I haven't made it yet, but I'll put it in. I'll put it on the channel. I won't put it in the chat. You guys can just check the channel. It'll be there, and I'll see you guys in 50 minutes. You're opting out for QP today? That's cool. No problem. Appreciate you always tuning in and watching, Raven. So, no, we're not live tomorrow. You guys know that. We don't go live on Fridays. So, if I don't see you for question period or the committee, Raven, hopefully you feel better, and we'll see you on Monday. Next week's going to be spicy, because we've got the budget. We've got Carney coming back from Asia. Next week is going to be really, really busy. So, anyway, let's head off for now, and I'll see you guys in 50 minutes. Cheers, guys.